Why do you think India avoided naming Pakistan explicitly in this document?
Cross-border terrorism is fairly self-explanatory. Maybe Pakistan is not specifically named is because why give them so much importance?
They just spend their money in bribing politicians everywhere in the world to be there. How long can we keep giving documents to these international bodies and say that, oh, Pakistan is it doesn't work.
You have to fight your own battle. You can't go to international forums and say that do this, do that. But it is a sort of an option to maximize your overall approach to terror.
West Asia conflict that is happening, what India can learn from this?
We should build our capabilities which by itself becomes a deterrence. We should have a clear plan when to use it, how to use it, and what should be the outcome of use of such coercive power.
It's a matter of time before all major buildings in this country will have to have anti-drone mechanisms installed in their terraces?
Maybe critical infrastructure, individual installations do need anti-drone systems. Even anti-drone systems are not really sort of 100% foolproof. Ballistic missiles, etc. have gone through even in Iran and the Gulf. Fabricating an IED used to be their favorite stuff. Now fabricating an IED and putting it in a drone is as good.
What do you feel when you watch the depiction of Faujis in Bollywood?
Unreal. I mean, the characters are very unreal. They'll be shouting loudly for no reason. Like if they're firing an artillery shell or something, they'll be screaming to the heavens. I mean, it doesn't work that way.
Where did you feel that there were things which were lacking and which you got around to doing it?
One thing about NSG is the government never says no to anything which the NSG usually asks.
CBI gets a very poor... I think their PR is pretty bad from being called a caged parrot, and now even the Supreme Court has called the case officer in the Arvind Kejriwal case.
No, I won't comment. I need my pension.
This episode is powered by easemytrip.com. Namaste, Jai Hind. You're watching or listening to another edition of the ANI podcast with Smita Prakash. In today's edition, we discuss internal security frameworks with special emphasis on PRAHAAR. PRAHAAR is India's first national counter-terrorism policy and strategy. In the studio with me is M.A. Ganapathy, former Chief of NSG or National Security Guard. He has a wealth of experience in internal security matters. So sit back and listen to how the men and women in uniform keep our country safe within our geographical borders. Welcome to the podcast, Mr. Ganapathy. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Of course, I want to talk about PRAHAAR, India's first national counter-terrorism policy and strategy. But before I get to that, I mean, the entire world has been engulfed with this West Asia conflict that is happening. It ought to have been just restricted to one particular region, but seems like it has impacted the entire world. There are many countries which are going to be rethinking their national security doctrine after what has happened. I mean, the first thing that strikes me is when Macron said that, talked about the nuclear option and said that we're going to be building more weapons and we're not going to be talking about it to the rest of the world and making clear as to what we're going to be doing, how many we're going to develop. So that itself got me thinking that just a couple of weeks after the Munich Security Conference, when all these European leaders were sitting and talking about how best to go forward, all of them are rethinking their security doctrine, what is going to happen. But coming back to the West Asia conflict, I'm just wondering that when these kind of attacks are done, if it's a joint attack by Israel and the US, did they have one objective in mind? Can two countries who are going into an operation like this have different objectives and yet the strategy and the tactics are the same? It seems a little confusing to me as a layperson. So could you explain to me as a practitioner of security related matters, how do you see this?
See, I have to confess that I'm not a real expert on war and how wars ought to be fought. My forte is more internal security. But then having been exposed to situations such as this in different capacities in my career, I can say that commonsensically speaking, every war should have clear objectives. And those objectives have to be achieved through clearly laid out plans. So if you lack in objectives and if your plans are not very clear, I think you can't control the outcome.
Okay.
The basic idea of getting into any war is to have a good exit. So otherwise it gets very messy.
True.
So perhaps what we are witnessing today is a manifestation of that to some extent, although it's too early to say what would be the trajectory, what are the staying powers of Iran. So that's all subject to debate.
Because when you're talking about exit policy, it's true. America should have probably gamed this, right? They know what happened in Vietnam. They know what happened in the Afghanistan situation, in Korean War, even if you go back all the way, that there are no short, sharp conflicts or wars. That's the objective of anybody, a military planner, to do that. But a short, sharp war is something which is not something that can be planned.
Say, a short, sharp war against a small country perhaps is possible. But Iran is a very huge country.
True.
I think it's half the size of India. So the sheer geographical dimension and the fact that it has one of the largest sort of reservoirs of ballistic missiles, and there are any number of places where it can be concealed. And we should also not disregard the fact that Iran is an ancient civilization with a sort of memory which goes back to generations. So they can't be just pushovers. But in spite of all this, I think the initial success which America and Israel achieved against them was a little surprising. It's surprising why Iran didn't anticipate this, how they were caught off guard. And it's happened previously also. They got into some kind of back room channel negotiations and paid a price of losing some of the senior leadership.
Right.
So anyway, having said all this, I'm again reiterating that these are all my commonsensical observations, but I've not really gone deep into this area.
I also want to ask you this question that, as somebody who's worked in CBI, who's worked with left-wing terrorism, extremism, you would know that intelligence plays a very, very large role in these kind of operations where several countries are involved in operations. To most people, Mossad is like an enigma as to how they manage to collect human, tech in, to do this kind of thing. And in the very first day, they figured out where the Ayatollah was and eliminated him and decapitated the entire top leadership of the Iranians. Is it something which is like which is something that all intelligence organizations can pick up? Tips from how they manage to go after their enemy?
Yeah, when it comes to tactical intelligence, I think there's none second to Israel. And even the Americans. I mean, we have to give credit to the kind of intelligence network they have and the kind of technology they use. Not just tech in, but even the human in part of it, I think is equally good. So they are the sort of forebearers of what good intelligence should be, especially when it comes to tactical intelligence.
Okay.
So there is another aspect of intelligence which is strategic intelligence, how you put pieces together and sort of predict outcomes. I don't know how far they have done it in this particular case.
Okay. So now let's go into this aspect of what India can learn from this. What do you think that, what are the things that India could do after seeing what has happened there?
I think, fairly basic. We should build our capabilities which by itself becomes a deterrence to our adversaries. And once we build such capabilities, we should have a clear plan when to use it, how to use it, and what should be the outcome of use of such coercive power. So the lessons are very basic. I think in any profession, including how wars are fought and won, basics count for a lot. And basic tactics include very detailed planning and very good capability, which is acquired over a period of time.
Let's come to PRAHAAR,
Yeah.
the first national counter-terrorism policy and strategy that India had. It was released a couple of weeks ago. So I want to know that why did we need one, or why has it come out now? Anything that you can think of that, because one would think that India has been battling internal terrorism, external cross-border terrorism for a long time. Was there something which was lacking that there's a need for a document like this?
So first of all, I think it's a very good thing that strategic policy statement has come out from the government. Usually such policies or strategic documents have three purposes. One is to tell its own citizens that we are prepared to face any kind of terror and our response will be very swift and precise. That's for a domestic audience, citizens. Then to the adversaries, that if we come across incidents of terror or if someone tries to harm our national security, we'll get a befitting response. And also thirdly, to all the instrumentalities of national security, the agencies, etc., clearly delineating roles and how they should go forth and make it a seamless kind of a system where any response or any approach towards terror is synchronized and harmonized and well coordinated. So the basic purpose of any such document is these broad areas.
But were there legal and procedural gaps because of which there was a need for a document like this?
See, I think what this document does is it sort of codifies all the prevailing practices and also expects refinement of tactics. This is a broad strategic statement. So it's got components. Each word under PRAHAAR has got a component of its own. So those components, for example, let's say prevention of terror attacks.
Yeah.
So the document says it has to be guided by good intelligence and also synergy among all the partners, state agencies, etc. So, but you can't spell out the tactics, how that will be done. So that's not for, general public to know or even for the adversary to be sort of enlightened.
Yeah.
So these tactics now in the form of SOPs, mini SOPs, etc. have to be worked out, and much of it is worked out and synergized over a period of time so that whenever a terror attack or intelligence about terror comes, all the agencies harmonize their efforts and tackle it in a very systematic manner.
So this prevention of terror attacks to protect Indian citizens and interests. When the recent attack happened last year, just before Operation Sindoor, there was a lot of talk that there were no SOPs in place which ought to have been there in a place like Kashmir, where, did we get soft, or did we think that, now Kashmiris are not going to not be influenced by cross-border terrorism, so it's not going to happen. There were procedural lapses out here. Areas which saw heavy tourist traffic did not have a police checkpost, did not have intel information. There was nobody out there. That Khabri network was not active. So a lot of people were saying that this aspect of prevention of terror attacks, that sees people going into some kind of a lull, when you are lulled into believing that terror is no longer all that present in a place like Kashmir.
So I won't go into the details of any specific incident because that would be unfair, because I am not privy to all that information so that I can do a post-mortem. But the very fact that prevention is the first point in this concept of PRAHAAR is important. And it also says, it assures the citizens that will have zero tolerance towards terrorism. So that throws a lot of onus on all the agencies. So if the government says that our approach is zero tolerance towards terror, all the agencies which have to ensure that, starting with the intelligence agencies, the central agencies, the state police, so the onus and responsibility is on them to ensure that there is a mechanism and a constant state of vigil which should ensure that it doesn't happen. Having said that, I mean, it's a sort of cliche to say that, the terrorists have to succeed only once and the security forces have to succeed every single time in preventing an attack. But then, in spite of that, the fact that the focus is on prevention shows the intent of the government, and also it's a sort of expectation from all the instruments of national security that your guard should be up there, and we have to sort of pool in all our resources to prevent a terror attack.
What about coordination between state police forces? If one particular state is active and sharp in intel gathering, in going after extremists, terrorists, if they are doing that, and the people from there who are indulging in this find refuge in a neighboring state where it might be lax, how does a document like this and systems which are going to be put in place, hopefully, how will that prevent this?
So, the document also spells out how it should be done, especially when it comes to responses. For the first time in this document, I find that police stations have been named as the first responders. So that's a very neglected area of police work. So in any kind of crime, law and order, terror attack, the works, the first respondent is always the police station. So this document recognizes that, and what follows up is equally important. How do you sort of upgrade the capacity
of the police station?
Because in a vast country like India, you have three layers: the police station, then comes the state special forces, and then the national special force, which is NSG and maybe other paramilitaries at times. So the weakest link is always the police station because of absence of capacity to deal with a real, very serious terror threat.
We saw that with left-wing extremism
everywhere,
in the battle,
everywhere.
Right? You in fact worked on fortification of police stations when you were, I think, Joint Secretary at that time, right?
Yeah. So that's very important. How do we build capacities at police station level, not just in terms of equipment, etc. Also clear-cut SOPs, clear-cut skill sets. At least some component of a police station should have that basic capacity to deal with the terror situation till the more sort of skilled forces arrive, whether it's a state special force or NSG or whoever. At least they should be able to do a very professional holding job.
Okay.
And I am quite sure, because this has been clearly mentioned, the next step would be to upgrade the skills and also come up with tactical SOPs on a kind of graduated response to contain terror attack and also eliminate it after the sufficient firepower, etc. has been mustered.
So, but now, you're dealing with terror at a different level altogether, chemical, biological warfare and stuff like that. And are our police stations, which are the first responders to these, are they trained to understand all this? Because again, I'm going to come back to those, when that attack took place in Delhi, when that suicide attack took place, and they found, that fertilizer stuff, which was hoarded in several kilos, hundreds of kilos, which in Haryana it was. How are you going to figure out that it is a component of fertilizers? So it looks like, rakh diya in some farm, how does it matter? Ammonium nitrate, right? If I'm not mistaken, that is what was kept out there. So now, how is a police station supposed to figure out that this is something which is strange?
So the first step is to familiarize them about the various manifestations of a terror mechanism. Once you familiarize them and give them certain skill sets, you also have to come up with very detailed plans of action. As I said, this is a strategic document, but the tactical details which are fleshed out and which emanate from these broad guidelines are extremely important. Okay. So that has to be really well thought out. I'm quite sure somebody is working on it. And once that's sort of clearly compiled or codified, then you also have to do a lot of mock drills, how to practice for an imaginary situation and all that. One of the weak links in our security architecture is that we don't do mock drills which come from bottom up. For example, police station should be the centerpiece where a mock drill on a possible terror situation gets engineered or triggered, and then the other forces go there.
We've seen NSG doing a lot of
mock
mock drills.
It's top down. So it's NSG which drives the mock drills, and also sort of
rapid action forces, all these.
NSG, largely it's NSG for urban terror. So then they rope in the state special forces, and police station is a marginal presence. So if the pyramid sort of gets inverted, and you have very strong tactical plans which are acted upon during peacetime, and that's how you build up your sort of capacity and also an understanding and familiarity with the actual situation. And I think the objective of this document is to sort of tell all the stakeholders that this is how you should do it, and that's why you all need to have your own individual plans which are synergized at the national level.
Okay, that's the responses that we're talking about, the R of the Prahaar. So in this, every state would have a different way of handling it, right? In the Northeast, you would have different ways of doing it. When you're talking about states which are battling with left-wing terror extremism, that would be different. Kashmir would be different. I would presume that some of the southern states have different kind of situations, how they deal with it. So explain to me, how will that work?
I think it's this document, this strategy, what it broadly says that is that there has to be some kind of a standardization in responses, some kind of uniformity in approach, and also how we have to sort of pool in all our resources together and come up with a unified approach to terror. So, yeah, what you're saying is right. Each state has a different approach. But this is largely about terror in the hinterland, not the Maoist and small little insurgencies here, there.
But then, like, for example, radicalization. Different state governments have different views about radicalization. So this document talks about de-radicalisation process and watching out for radical elements and things like that. Kerala would have a different way of looking at it. Uttar Pradesh would have a different, and that depends on the political leadership in those states. So how does one document work for both the states now? Tell me.
Yeah, that will take some doing. How to bring about consensus in all our approaches. So that's the next part, attenuating conditions conducive to terrorism. It's a little difficult word, attenuating, but it's written in very good English, I should say. So there are two aspects. One is counter-radicalisation, which is a very broader kind of intervention, and the other one is de-radicalisation. See, there are models of de-radicalisation which are extremely good. It started during the peak of ISIS sort of influenced radicalization which was taking
Indian
part
Mujahideen and the others.
No, ISIS.
ISIS. Okay.
There are a lot of young people who are getting radicalized over the net due to ISIS propaganda and their videos and all that. And some states did an excellent job of de-radicalization. De-radicalization, when you identify individuals, approach them and try to get them out of grip of an extremist ideology. Counter-radicalization is a broader narrative where you make your approach more inclusive, take people along, everybody along and stuff like that, and that feeling of nationalism.
Kashmir vote.
All that. So some states, I mean, I can quote from my knowledge that states like Telangana, Maharashtra, and a couple of others did excellent job of de-radicalization. So I'm sure that the Ministry of Home Affairs has that institutional knowledge, and these models can easily be replicated all over. Yes, it does need a bit of political will across.
And community leaders need to participate in it.
So there are very well sort of worked out models. They just need to be replicated. Sometimes what happens is each practitioner thinks that his model is better than the other, and there are some ego issues and all that. But in this case, the excellent models, and many young people were de-radicalized during that period. And it's to the credit of our entire country that the ISIS ideology, which influenced large sort of swathes of youth across the world, had very little appeal in India.
So but there are cases, I mean, when...
Those are isolated cases.
Yeah, the beheading kind of tactics which were used in some cases were ISIS inspired.
Yeah, there were exceptions to the norm. Otherwise, we should also remember that we have a very large population of minorities in this country, but those who got influence were really very few.
Okay. But also this self-radicalization which happens, that threat that comes in just by watching videos and all that, and that's also mentioned out here about various kind of methodologies which are being used. Is it something that the police forces in this country are aware of, and how are they handling that?
Yeah, say what I told you about this those models were largely about self-radicalized people. So the forces, the intelligence forces especially, kept a very good watch over even the darknet, etc. Identified people who were following such literature or material on the internet, identified them, and rather than take punitive action immediately, got them through counseling and all that, and made them get rid of that extremist kind of feeling. So those models are available, as I said, but one problem with self-radicalization is it can be done in complete isolation. It's not always possible to keep tab over millions of people. So it has to be a combination of counter-radicalization and de-radicalization. The larger narrative also should aim at appealing to the sentiments of everybody.
Like this doctor network which took place, you know, like, and the backstory was kind of fascinating and morbidly fascinating in that respect, that a woman who was sitting in Lucknow gets radicalized, leaves her job, leaves her family, goes into a Haryana medical college, starts telling girls to wear burqa and not wear jeans. Now, this could just be one auntie who's getting bored and, you know, decides to become traditional. वो भी होता है. Lots of people say कि वो, and you know, many of the kids who get into this, the family say that, but there was nothing, he was studying all the time. One of the doctors was that. The sister-in-law said that, you know, he was our hope. We are all, my mother-in-law will die if she comes to know about this, because she saved money and he was the only doctor in our family. He was supposed to pull us out of poverty. And all he would do is study. What they didn't know that he was studying this literature as well and getting radicalized. Now, how even when a family can't tell, how is the police force supposed to tell?
Yeah, that's why you have to have a broad watch over what happens in the social media and all kinds of networking platforms, etc. So the problem with this is much of ISIS-inspired modules, etc., are comprised of educated people. They were not like struggling youth looking for a job and stuff. That many were professionals. I mean, including these doctors you're talking about. Somewhere, for some reason, after ISIS spread its influence across some parts of the world, professionals got attracted to that kind of extremist ideology.
Yeah.
And they also had the skill set and also the intelligence quotient to sort of replicate some of the lessons which ISIS would have imparted on
Even
them.
before that, 9/11 also.
9/11
they were
also.
educated guys.
So that's the radicalization. Sometimes
it's not poor and unemployed who are getting into it.
It's quite often educated and the well-to-do. So that's a very, very strange paradox. The more educated you get, the less extremist you should be. It doesn't always work that way. So coming to your question, the only way is to have a very good sort of system of watching over the net. Also having some kind of human int also on the ground. It sometimes doesn't always work out that you just have this very good technical intelligence, but you have a vacuum in the streets. So you should also get information from the streets about people who are showing such tendencies. For example, it
Does
has
the
to be...
document talk about a network to be created?
It talks about a whole of society approach, whole of government approach.
That is the umbrella.
Yeah. For example, I'll just give you an example. If some person is buying 25 kilograms of ammonium nitrate somewhere, and he is not into farming or stuff like that, it should trigger a sort of alarm somewhere. The shopkeepers should have a system of reporting to the police. The police should have the sensitivity to understand this is something unusual. So that's how a sort of whole of society, whole of government approach will work. So that is the ambitious sort of, I think, outcome which this document aims right at the end.
Because I know while speaking with some police officers who dealt with the Naxal operations, and they said that a number of times the tips came about top leaders coming in through, because they operate in these concentric circles. So like the T-boy, because in many times they would have these T-boys to come and give the tea, but then those children were their people too.
Yeah.
So that same T-boy would tell them that the cops are here, and the same T-boy would tell the cops that these guys have come. So a number of times that these networks, which one tends to think that they are outmoded in the times of cell phone and all, but that network of human beings in these places matters a lot. Tell me from your experience, how was that useful?
The Naxal situation is a little different. So you get all kinds of hint about Naxals all the time. I mean, in their heyday. But the problem with how to sort of go about it was because the terrain was so inhospitable and out of reach. So once the security forces reached into remote parts of Bastar or Jharkhand or Odisha, set up camps, etc., the security vacuum was filled up. And once that vacuum was filled up, slowly intelligence also started. And then the police also got tactically savvy, especially I think the turning point in the Naxal game is the Chhattisgarh police, how they sort of upgraded the capability through the DRG, etc. And Naxals always relied on IDs and information. Face-to-face sort of combat, they always avoided, retreated. So once certain SOPs came into existence on IED avoidance, and security forces reached towards the hideouts and set up camps, whenever there was a face-to-face sort of fight after that, they lost heavily. But the turning point, I would say, is the Chhattisgarh police getting the act together. So that's different. This is more like urban terror, jihadi terror. So here the systems are a little different.
Okay.
Here, I think the more outreach a police station has towards the local population. See, when we were beginners in the profession, it was mandatory for us to go and set up mohalla committees, have meetings with them at a very sort of micro level. So much intelligence used to come from that. And we also used to know what happened in a police station, whether it was functioning properly, etc. So that network is equally important in today's circumstance, not just from terror point of view, but just as a tool of better policing. Your outreach results in positive outcomes, especially in collection of human intelligence. And if you have a good technical intelligence set up to back it up, it's a very ideal kind of a situation.
Okay. I'm going to quote from the document. It says, increasingly terrorist groups are engaging organized criminal networks for logistics and recruitment to execute and facilitate terror strikes in India. So explain to me what can be done to dismantle these criminal networks which operate intrastate. So if they are operating all across the country, they're sitting in jails, some of the heads, and still operating it. So this cross-fertilization of criminal network and terror network.
So it's an interesting development of recent years. Earlier, if you had to set up a terror network, you had to have sympathizers, you had to have somebody who believed in your sort of approach to, whatever may be the sort of root cause, etc. You had to set up an entire network of sympathizers and also those who are committed to the cause, etc. So now it's, and that's a very elaborate network.
So-called cause.
So-called married to the cause. So that's a very elaborate network, and sometimes there are weak links in that. They can get exposed, get caught by security forces or intelligence agencies. And also it takes a lot of organization and raising money, resources, etc. Now it's outsourced. So what do organized gangs do? What is their motive? Their motive is only profit. So they're ready to render their services to anybody who pays them money. So now most terror networks, many terror networks sort of outsource the requirements of whatever logistics or even weapons, everything, to an organized crime network. And then it becomes much easier for them to operate without a network as it used to happen in the olden days.
Okay. I also, the policy, the paper also mentions using using drones, robotics, dark web. And we saw this, in these recent terror attacks which have happened, whether that they were communicating with each other through the dark web. Are our police force equipped enough to handle that?
So I think the idea is to upgrade capabilities. The threat areas have been identified. Where does the threat emanate from?
Okay.
And the document also sort of enunciates what are the modes of communication, dark web, social media handles, etc., etc. And it also sort of mentions what are the new age threats, drones and cross-border drones, etc., dropping weapons, dropping explosives. So all that has been sort of spelt out in the document. So now all the agencies need to work on how to upgrade their own skills and also how to prevent such things from happening. Okay. So that would be the tactical part of this entire
and they would need
network.
They would need the help of these platforms, right?
Yeah.
Which are being used used for terror purposes. They need all these international platforms because we don't have our own platform.
Exactly.
They're using all these, and now with AI coming in, it's a very complex process to get the international players involved in this also. So do you think that once we have a document like this, it will be easier to do that?
See, that will still remain a challenge because that's something which you don't fully control. But it also says we have to sort of maximize international cooperation to fight terror in a very systematic manner. So the international cooperation would definitely mean exchange of information, which you just mentioned, such information. It also means using some of the instrumentalities of the United States, for example, although it's lost much of its teeth now. There is the UNSC Sanctions Committee, which designates terror groups, even individual terrorists, etc. There is FATF, Financial Action Task Force,
which has this color coding for Pakistan, which keeps changing.
Yeah, so but it's still a fairly effective instrumentality, although of late I think it's lost a bit of its relevance.
It's completely useless.
Yeah, so I would say it's become suboptimal. It can still be used. It can still be used.
Pakistan is in the grey group and they are best friends with America. How does that happen?
That's
with
true.
the most powerful country in the world.
So the reality in life is that most of the international instruments which are sort of mandated to fight this
I'm not
usually
charitable
go with
towards-
the most powerful country.
Yeah, so
So they call the shots. That happens in all the world
I think
forums.
we have wasted too much time in going to the FATF and lobbying against Pakistan.
No.
They just spend their money in bribing politicians everywhere in the world to be their lackeys.
Yeah, that could be true.
And we go through the path of documents and submitting documents.
Yeah, that's true. But at the same time, we have to make optimal use of whatever is there. So you can't just say that, FATF actions are suboptimal or it's not in tune with what actually should happen. I mean, you can't withdraw from a scene like that. You can only sort of work your way up, and also, I mean, it's a question of national power.
I'm afraid we both are on a different. You know why I tend to disagree? Because do you remember the time when we used to submit dossier after dossier to Pakistan?
Yeah.
And then what happened? Until we didn't do cross-border ourselves, they didn't come to their senses. So how long can we keep giving documents to these international bodies and say that, oh, Pakistan is a... It doesn't work, sir.
No. I am saying you have to fight your own battle. You can't go to international forums and say that do this, do that. But it is a sort of an option to maximize your overall approach to terror. Ultimately, you build your own capabilities. You make yourself strong. You have strong institutional structures. You have, most professional people looking at this problem. So that's internal. But there are external instruments which this document talks about, in spite of their less than optimal, I would say, use, can still be sort of approached for certain things like mounting international pressure, or even sometimes some exchanges which are useful can happen through MLATs, mutual legal assistance treaties. So that's another way of doing it. If international institutions are failing, you can have very good sort of domestic bilateral arrangements with countries which facilitate extradition, information exchange. So it's about maximizing whatever is available in spite of whatever shortcomings these institutions
So also, with this, what has happened in West Asia, one is only hearing, right now rumors or secondary reporting which is happening that the CCTV network which was in place in Iran. So apparently Israelis had complete data information on that. Secondly, what we are hearing, not been corroborated as yet, but the other thing which we heard was that the Chinese provided information about the location of some of the Americans who had got out of the bases and were living in some of the high rises in other Middle Eastern countries, not Israel, but other Middle Eastern countries. So Iran did targeted drone attacks on those buildings. They knew exactly which floor because those Americans were using apps, Snapchat or Uber or whatever. Now, none of this it's all source-based information about the CCTV network also and about the apps also. But it is a possibility, isn't it? You're coming into that stage where these things can be used. Now, they can be used by the terror networks. They can be used by law enforcement. So explain to me how it can be by us.
Any system with networking platforms are amenable for hacking by either a state actor or even a non-state actor. So you have to have the cybersecurity of the highest order whenever you have networking system. That it's not just about CCTV, for example. I mean, this document also talks about critical infrastructure, aviation, railways, power, etc. They all have networking systems. So any state player or even a non-state player can hack into it and use it to his advantage. So getting into CCTV is much minor compared to that. And I'm sure Israelis must have done it. So one of the sort of main points in this document is that we should have the cyber capability of the highest level and also cyber protection of the highest level.
Yeah.
So that's doable because we have a lot of professionals who are very good in IT. And now IT also has become a little outdated. AI is the new kid in town. So I'm quite sure that our indigenous capability, especially in AI, which is developing, would be sort of dovetailed into our security requirements also, including cyber security and network security, etc. So that's a very important part of our overall approach because even wars, the nature of wars have changed. Drone warfare is the sort of latest. I mean, we have seen it in Ukraine and also what Iran is doing.
Yeah.
So drones, cyber, all these are emerging areas, and
those military technologies now will need to be used for civilian purposes too, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, I've been saying this for quite some time now that. In fact, for 2 years or more, I've been talking to policymakers, I've been talking to security experts about this, that everybody was so excited about drones coming in. Oh, it's going to be used to provide medicines within towns and all that. But there's a lot that can happen with drones, which it's cheap. And anti-drone mechanism is more expensive. But do you see, sir, that it's a matter of time before all major buildings in this country, whether it is of the public sector, whether it is law enforcement, or even schools, colleges, railway stations, metro stations, all of this will have to have anti-drone mechanisms installed in their terraces?
So that would be very expensive for each building to have, but you can have very strong air defense systems from what little I know about drone warfare. Israel has something called Iron Dome, as you know. So you can have a larger system, but maybe critical infrastructure, individual installations do need anti-drone systems. So because it's extremely cheap and as you see, if it hits a refinery or something, it causes immense damage, collateral damage as well as economic damage. So this is a new dimension of war. And it's still unraveling. So even anti-drone systems are not really sort of 100% foolproof. It can still get through. And even the larger systems, which sort of block an entire area, you see some of the ballistic missiles, etc., have gone through even in Iran and the Gulf. So it's still evolving. So I'm not an expert on this.
But all this military technology will be used for civilian purposes too.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's always a dual use for many technologies, and even drone is somewhat similar. It's very useful for agriculture and short ferrying of essential goods and stuff like that. At the same time, it's become a very cheap weapon for the terrorists. It's like fabricating an IED used to be their favorite stuff. Now fabricating an IED and putting it in a drone is as good. So these are cheap solution, low cost and high sort of returns for terrorists.
How will this new document that we have and this strategy that is evolving, how will we be able to bust sleeper cells? Because after the Delhi attack, speaking to many people who were like, हमें तो पता भी नहीं है कि साथ में कौन रहता है हमारे घर के साथ में. In these big multi-storied buildings and things, you don't even know who your neighbor is. That whole system is gone. And even if you know that there is something suspicious, who do you tell? And will it come back to haunt you if you give this information? So these sleeper cells exist because common citizens are fearful of reporting if they see something suspicious which is happening. So how will the police be able to bust these sleeper cells which exist in our country?
So first, there are two ways of doing it. Sleeper cells don't emerge overnight. They are part of a network. So this entire strategy demands that it should be prevention oriented. So it puts an onus on all the intelligence agencies to keep a very close watch on all the important terror networks. So once you do that, you will also have some insight into people who support it, overground workers, etc. and you also keep a watch on them. That's one part of it. So that's the preventive aspect. And once you come to know that they're up to something suspicious, you catch them, you prosecute them before they've committed an act, etc., etc. But there's another aspect which you said, citizens, because of fear, don't come forth. I think more than fear, it's an absence of that kind of orientation. So what this document says is that you should have a whole of society kind of an approach, where common citizens should be made aware of how to do reporting of suspicious activities and stuff like that. So that throws an onus on the citizens also. There are many ways of doing it. You don't have to go personally. There are reporting systems. You can call a number which the police give, etc. But I think more than anything, what is lacking is awareness of identifying a suspicious activity, and at the same time being conscientious enough and also having that sort of instinct to sort of contribute whatever little you can towards nation building. That's very important for any citizen.
True.
Rich, poor, middle class. So quite often we are indifferent. We'll see something right in front of our eyes and then we disregard it.
Unless during the process of Operation Sindoor, when the civil defense system, when local governments at the admin level, they put out this thing that come and who can come and volunteer for civil defense. And the number of people who came out in so many small towns and cities of this country saying, yes, we want to be part of it. But that is in extraordinary circumstances. For it to be a natural thing for a person to do, inform, be part of some network. So it has to start at, say, the RWA level, at the school college level, that initiate that kind of a thing. So if you're talking about now a strategy, a national strategy, that needs to come from educators to say that that's your responsibility.
Yeah, that should be the ultimate aim. A society which is geared towards meeting a national security threat with a sort of comprehensive kind of approach towards the whole issue. So that would mean not just the security agencies, but every part of our, every instrument, every part, every... the onus will be on the citizen primarily to sort of realize that we have faced the threat of terror for a very long time. And it's not just the government or the agencies which can deal with it. So that I don't think it'll happen overnight, but
do we have the capacity, sir? And is there a blueprint? Like, can we look at another country, say Singapore or somebody else, or Switzerland, Sweden, any of these countries, and see how they deal with it? And can we do that? And plus, do we have the capacity? I mean, we're not even talking about police reforms right now. I can't even go into that. That's one thing that needs to be there. Training the police itself is a big task. So, training common citizens, training first responders, how do we have the capacity?
So it's not a question of capacity. The problem is the sort of India is a very large country. You can't compare India with, let's say, Singapore or Switzerland and stuff like that, and say that you need a seamless kind of an approach towards national security. First of all, these countries don't face the kind of threat which India does. Secondly, it is a challenge. It is a challenge to have a very large population geared towards a single purpose of sort of having a seamless approach towards combating terror. So I think as I said right in the beginning, one of the objectives of this document is to educate the citizens that we are always under threat and we have a zero tolerance policy. And also it sort of demands a certain level of effort from the citizen to join that pursuit of preventing and eliminating terror. So it can't happen overnight because there are various levels of education, levels of understanding within our population. But I think it's an ambitious statement of intent which sort of, if realized fully, can result in a situation which you just spoke of.
So, let me come to NSG. You've headed that. For people who don't know what the NSG does, could you tell me briefly about why it was formed, what does it do, and what was it that where did you feel that there were things which were lacking and which you got around to doing it? Was it like intelligence sharing with others? Was it slow responses? What was it that was happening there?
See, the origin of NSG is that it's an federal anti-terror force, mainly catered to responding to urban terror. The competency is especially building interventions and also anti-hijacking duty, so terminating a hijacking. So I don't really want to go into the operational details, but one thing I can say is NSG has the best weaponry, the best equipment, and also perhaps the best protective gear, which is comparable to any special force in the world. And its tactics are also similar to the best special forces. So one thing about NSG is the government never says no to anything which the NSG usually asks. Because it's a very small force. It is a contingency force which is there to meet extreme terror threats, like very large scale outbreak of terror in especially urban areas. It's not a counter-insurgency force like some other, like for example, anti-Naxal force would be a different kind of a force in more adapted jungle warfare. This is a urban anti-terror force with exceptionally good capability in building interventions, which is a special skill, and termination of hijackings, which is again a special skill, and also certain other areas which I do not. Really
what is one or two of the experiences that you had when you were in the NSG, which
we didn't have any operations as such, because if you see in the hinterland, although the sporadic terror incidents get reported prominently, India has been largely free of terror attacks except for minor ones, except in maybe J&K, where we have had major ones. But in the hinterland of India, there have been, I think the Red Fort was one of the recent attacks. But that also, I think, almost sort of got curbed right at the beginning, but some elements managed to sneak out and affect this. But otherwise, apart from that, there have been very few large terror attacks.
Okay. But you were also DIG of the anti-corruption wing in Delhi. Tell me about the investigation in those corruption cases that you had.
So that was CBI a long time back. Yeah. I don't even sort of...
You don't remember that? Remember that. But okay.
So I did a interesting case in CBI, which was the cricket
scandal. Yes.
match fixing.
Match fixing.
Yeah,
Tell me about that.
So there was, I think it was 2001. So there was this huge sort of furor after Tehelka brought out some tapes saying that certain cricketers are into fixing matches and stuff like that. So it was based on sort of tapes recorded by one player. And I mean, it was not very clear like what kind of fixing they did and stuff like that. So, but there are more insinuations than actual proof. So, but there were hints that something wrong was going on. I mean, to the credit of whoever did that, there were hints of wrongdoing.
But when you're doing CBI, CBI gets a very poor. I think their PR is pretty bad from being called a caged parrot, and now even the Supreme Court has called the case officer in the Arvind Kejriwal case and said you didn't present a good case. So I think the investigations are poor, or they are not able to. How is it?
No, I won't comment. I need my pension. You don't grudge my pension, but I can say that CBI had very, very fine investigators. I spent time in CBI long ago. That was, I think I exited in 2006 or something. So we had very fine investigators. And one problem always with CBI is that you get cases which are cold. I mean, in the sense, if it's a murder case or property case, etc., it comes to CBI after a long time. So any case which comes after a long time, it's very difficult to piece it together because the evidence gets lost. And quite often, those days, people had very little knowledge how to preserve evidence at the police station level and stuff like that. So it's always a Herculean task for CBI to piece together evidence which still remains or which has been collected by somebody else and present a cogent case. But that said, those days CBI had a very good prosecution sort of conviction rate.
Okay.
So then the other category is corruption cases. Corruption cases broadly are difficult to prove unless you sort of track the money channel. There is a clear quid pro quo. Quite often what happens is that quid pro quo is not so evident. You see some wrongdoing on the file, but at the same time you can't prove that it resulted in exchange of money or loss to the exchequer and stuff like that. It's a little complicated. Having said that, I really don't want to comment on...
Okay. So, when I get people from the armed forces on the show or intel chiefs on the show, I've always asked them that, what do you feel when you watch the depiction of Fauji's in Bollywood, or when you show, the IB chief or the RAW chief when it is shown on? Do you think that the depiction is accurate or authentic when you watch it?
It's very unreal. I mean, the characters are very unreal. I mean, that's my impression.
Okay.
So, for example, when they show some movies in which army people are there, they'll be shouting loudly for no reason. Like if they're firing a artillery shell or something, they'll be screaming to the heavens. I mean, it doesn't work that way.
And as a policeman?
And policemen, stereotypical, you are the sort of soft target. Policemen are usually the soft target for most Bollywood directors. And sometimes they do depict good characters, but they're also sort of the other end of exaggeration, like paragons of efficiency. So like most human beings, we are all somewhere in the middle.
But there are many OTT serials I've seen which are so close to real thing, where and some of the actors are really taking trouble interacting with the policemen and women and seeing how they live. Also, the frustration of dealing with politicians who interfere in certain cases and put pressure on policemen, whether at the lower level to right on top. I think some of it now in OTT serials, I find that it seems realistic.
I see. I unfortunately have absolutely no knowledge of OTT series, especially. I do watch detective serials, but not so much. I mean, these kind of. But it's a reality of life that a policeman's profession is very complex. So there are all kinds of all kinds of pressures on him. And also, every day is different. Suddenly you'll have a problem which you never faced in your entire career. It happens like that. So, I mean, a seasoned policeman of years of standing can suddenly be confronted with a problem which he's never faced. So it's an entire sort of gamut of issues which he is confronted with. And also he has pressure and pulls from various quarters. So it's not an easy life.
Yeah.
So if those OTT platforms are showing somebody who's doing a good job in spite of all this pressure, I feel good. But at the same time, I should also confess that policemen can also be very corrupt, very incompetent, very inefficient. So that's also another side of the story. So we should always aim to sort of upgrade our skills and society has sort of not restored. We should repay the faith society has in the police as a system, not as an individual policeman, but we have an institutional role to ensure justice to the extent possible. So I think we should
and
discharge that.
Mental and physical fitness levels of policemen and women. This is something that many people talk about. That you see them standing, by the side of politicians, by the side of people they're supposed to protect, and they have pot-bellied. And you keep thinking, how will they run and catch somebody? How will they be able to? So this is a lot that they're talking about, and also the mental fitness levels. You're hearing a lot about yoga classes, therapies which are being conducted. So are we talking in terms of equipping our policemen and women with tools which will make them mentally and physically fit?
We can do much better, actually. That's not for the government to actually, do. It's for leaders of the force to do. So there are no shortage of resources. Most police departments are well endowed with funds, especially by the central government. May not be so much in the states, but then there is no absence of resources which result in, a policeman being unfit or mentally not up there. So it's a lot to do with the leadership also. What is their focus? You have to invest in building up your men. I mean, men in the sense now there are a lot of women also.
Yes, sure.
So your force.
Okay.
So that should be your focus, how to upgrade the skills, how to look after their welfare, how to get them to meet challenges. That you can do a lot by yourself. You don't need any external support for that.
Okay, another question is that, people keep talking about, society's become so polarized and all that. Policemen and women also come from society itself. As a leader of a force, how do you make sure that this kind of polarization doesn't come in the way of policing?
That's again a question of leadership. So you can also sort of become a polarizing figure. You can also become a sort of cementing figure. So it's a path which you choose for yourself. So I would say much of policing is about how the middle level leaders and the basic unit would be a police station, and the most important leader would be the superintendent of police of a district, or a DCP as they call him here, and up there would be the DGP or the commissioner. These are the sort of leadership pillars. So much of how the force behaves is a result of what is the approach of the leaders to orienting the force. So you have good, bad, and different.
Okay. Finally, to come back to the document that we were discussing about, there's one thing that many people noticed, and that, we're talking about, it talks about terrorism, but there is no mention of Pakistan in this. We talk about, cross-border terrorism. It's obvious that it's Pakistan that we are facing cross-border terrorism from. Why do you think India avoided naming Pakistan explicitly in this document?
I think cross-border terrorism is fairly self-explanatory. And I think maybe Pakistan is not specifically named is because why give them so much importance? India is a major power. And why should you in your policy document mention countries whose national power is, a minuscule amount of what your national power is? I think that's a good thing.
Okay. All right. On that note, thank you so much, sir, for spending time with us and explaining this document and much more. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you for watching or listening to this edition of the NR Podcast with Smita Prakash. Do like or subscribe on whichever channel you've seen this or heard this. Namaste. Jai Hind. This episode is powered by easemytrip.com. Click here to watch the previous episodes.